All right, we are live. What is up, everybody? We got a great show and a great topic to talk about tonight. Relationships. My favorite topic. My favorite topic. How we doing out there, y'all? Oh, this isn't a bad spot. Hold on, let's do this. Whoop. Problem solved. No longer a problem. I should also, auto hide this, huh? Let's see here. We auto hide my taskbar so that y'all can see better. Look at that. Automatically hide the taskbar. Oh, it's working. It's working. All right. Man, I don't... Oh, I see. I just needs to go over there. Okay. All right. Actually, I think for tonight, what we do... Nope. Not that. We don't do that. We don't do that. We put that back, and then we grab the whole... Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, they're messing with me. I give up. It's staying there. It's staying there. I was going to put it in the top right corner, but apparently that's failing me. So this is where I will be for the remainder of the episode. This concludes the troubleshooting portion of Average People Talking. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're going to talk about 10 bad relationship assumptions that most people tend to make. Now, before I go and do this, there is a reasonable chance. There's a reasonable chance that I'm going to say some things tonight that's going to make some people uncomfortable, because my opinions on relationships are kind of out there. But I encourage you to watch my other videos on relationships as well. What I want to do is I want to condense a bunch of thoughts that I have and different ideas that I've kind of touched on in the other videos, and just put them into a conveniently more streamlined, shorter episode tonight, and do so by summarizing these bad relationship assumptions. So what I mean by bad is not bad as in you're naughty. I mean bad as in unjustified. The assumption that you're making is not based on reality or fact. It's just an assumption that you're making that you hope is true, and you're irrational and emotional in doing so. And let's be honest, love and relationships are the number one thing in life that really tends to make us irrational, and think stuff that's just, patently not true or not fact-based. So, without more upfront information, let's talk about it. Number one is probably number one in terms of the most common. It's also probably number one in terms of the just all around most I don't know what I'm trying to say. It causes the most problems. It's the most consequential. You will have the most issues come up because you think that you and the person you're in a relationship with want the same thing. And what do I mean by want the same thing? I mean have the same goal in mind. And this can be at short-term times, or this can be overall in the long run. Really, it can go both ways. Both of you wanting the same thing is actually really rare. At least not at the same time. So, just to be specific, the vast majority of people assume both people want their relationship to go all the way to the end of the relationship escalator, which I've talked about in the past, right? That legacy phase, marriage, maybe children, mutually owning property and cohabitating, sharing habitats, all of that. But I also mean both want the same thing in terms of current life goals. If you think about it, that would be incredibly rare for you and any other singular person to have. Right? Like, who do you know that shares similar career goals for the next 5 years for themselves with you? Who do you know that shares similar life improvement goals with you? It's very rare that you share goals in general with another individual. And if you share some of the same goals, you probably don't share them in the same priority list. So if you assume this, and a lot of people do because they don't talk about with their partners at all whether or not that person wants the same thing. If you guys aren't discussing it, if you're not talking about it, you probably are assuming underneath the lack of discussion that you both have similar goals. That's a really bad assumption because it's almost certainly not true based on, again, you think about you and any other one person. What are the odds that you guys have similar goals in life right now? Almost none. And yet here you are just moseying about assuming you guys want the same thing. So that's really what I mean by that. And I think it causes the most issues because if someone wants to get to that end stage of a relationship in the next couple of years of their life and you're not ready for a long time, that's going to create a real big rift. That's going to cause a real problem and cause both of you to waste a lot of resources. And that's a challenge. So that's the number one overall one. You got to talk about your goals. You got to talk about whether or not you share the same life goals. You got to talk about whether or not you share the same relationship goals, but also personal goals. What goes along with that is that I often see people don't talk about what it actually means when they enter into a relationship, and we put that word around it. We call it something, we name it, which means we're going exclusive. And yet we don't talk about what exclusive actually means. You probably assume that everyone has the same definition of exclusive on some level. But this is obvious that that's not true. Especially in a day and age where, let's be honest, we have digital devices that give us access to lots of interesting social situations that didn't exist years ago. Whether it be porn, dating apps, private chats, Snapchats that disappear, text messages that can be deleted, Facebook messages in incognito mode. There are a million ways to have a secret conversation. And the contents of that conversation, if I don't talk about what your definition of exclusive is and what my definition of an exclusive is, how a lot of couples tend to resolve this problem is they just say, all communication must be up front and I have to be able to see everything. Because I'm not going to tell you or define what it means because that's a difficult conversation to have. I'm just going to go through your shit and you better hope you don't violate my feelings or opinions. And if you do, then I'm just going to put more restrictions on you. We get into this possessive behavior. I've seen many couples do that. I've seen many couples go down that road, and it's a disaster. It's way easier to just agree on what exclusive means if that's what you want to do, and what exclusive could mean between you. And then do that. Now, obviously, if you watch my other videos, you know I'm ethically non-monogamous, specifically polyamorous, and I tend to float towards a concept called relationship anarchy. So I don't even believe in exclusive in a sense. But I will tell you that I do believe in exclusive in a sense, because to me, what exclusive relationship means, when I define a relationship that I have with somebody, I don't believe there's any two properties that me and that person could share that no other two people could share. There's 7 billion people on the earth, which means, roughly 2 billion couples right? If we assume 4 billion of them are old enough to couple, and have some success at it, right? There's somewhere like 2 billion total couples on planet Earth. All right. 2 billion? You're 1 in 2 billion? You don't think that there's odds that somebody does something very similar to you or in the exact same way? Or, oh, that cutesy little thing that is just between you two? Or even like any of the things that we normally put around the exclusive box. I just think it's like nothing makes relationships unique except everything. It's only when you look at the totality of what it's like to be you and me together in this relationship that all of it becomes exclusive, in a sense that no two people could do it like you and that person. No two people could share everything that you and that person shared. The experiences, the taste, the preferences, the things you guys like to do together. There may be one thing that another couple also does. There may be multiple things that another couple also does. There may be things that you do with other people that aren't the person you're in a relationship with. And for me, as an ethically non-monogamous person, I put no restrictions on that. I could care less what you do with any other person if that's what's right for your relationship. But what's exclusive about you and I is everything about you and I, right? Because nobody could paint the picture that way, and that's the real masterpiece of it. Now, that's for me, and that's what I talk about with everyone that I'm in relationship with. And we agree on what exclusive means before we really go too further with it, because if you both understand it, there's a lot less chance of anybody getting hurt or causing any problems. So, yeah, that's the scoop on exclusive. Which brings us to a very similar concept for the third one. And this is a common problem, I think, for a lot of people, is boundaries, right? What I mean by this, and again, I'm saying assumptions. I'm saying that you assume what someone's boundaries are, or you assume that they know yours. The other assumption that gets made is that whatever boundaries you've created and whatever boundaries they've created is based on some rationally justified, well-meaning concept. Well, if you've watched my other videos, you know I kind of throw that out pretty quickly and try to bring up a lot of evidence for why that's not the case. But most of the time, let's start with just figuring out what each other's boundaries actually are, being honest and upfront about it, and having a conversation about boundaries. Because other people will not... They might assume that you have similar sets of boundaries, or that we know what the boundaries around things would be. And this extends to everything: behavior, relationships, how you operate in your business life, how you merge your friends groups, how you merge your life spaces. But there's a good chance your assumptions are wrong, because every individual is very, very unique and different and might have their own set of boundaries. So don't fall into this trap. Don't make that unjustified assumption that you know what someone else's boundaries are, or that they know yours. Yes. And we come to one of my most frustrating ones. And this is the possessiveness over someone's time. Your time belongs to me. Unless you're doing a pre-sanctioned activity like work, like a party that you were obligated to go to, that you told me about it. If you don't have anything going on, I assume that you owe me your time, which means your attention. It means your physical presence. It means everything. Let me just say that this assumption is not helping you. It gives you the illusion that you're getting something that you want in the relationship, but you actually don't want it, because it's only going to make you paranoid. And here's what I mean. And yes, I'm going as strong to say paranoid. I mean, if you always make this assumption about somebody else, when do they have the opportunity to just give you their time? You want to feel loved and appreciated and like someone is choosing you over the other things that they could do in the world, but you never give them the opportunity to ever make the choice. This is especially for couples that have moved in together, and for relationships that advance to that stage. Or I would just say relationships that have gone on for longer than 6 months, where you're into that regular routine where that happens. So oh, I know that you don't have anything going on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturday nights, so I assume you're going to spend all of them with me. Can't do it. Can't do it. Because then that person never has the opportunity to freely give you that extra time. And the thing is a lot of people will tell me their relationship failed because, they were too busy. They didn't make time for me. They didn't care about me. And it's like, did you assume that every time they had a break from what you think was acceptable for them to be busy with, that break should be filled with you and not a break for themselves personally? Did you make that assumption? That's a possessive assumption about their time. And this one's painful because we all do it. I've done this many times in relationships. I assume that someone owes me that. Why wouldn't I? We're in this committed relationship, right? Except you wouldn't do that to any of your friends. You would be perfectly understandable if some of your other friends or family members were in that situation where time they would normally give to you is actually going to be busy doing something else or become personal time for them. You wouldn't make this assumption and think it was justified, but we tend to do it to our significant others, and I think that's wrong. This is a big deal. And I think if you can get away from doing it, it actually makes it so much more rewarding. Because you'll realize maybe for yourself, you're assuming you need to give more time to something, and you should actually be taking that time for yourself. Maybe you'll all of a sudden be surprised that the person that you're with wants to choose to give you some time around certain things and it feels way nicer. It feels way better that they chose to spend that time with you. So yeah, the time assumption. Got to get rid of that one. Oh, yes. The worst assumption of all. That your partner will only want to have sex with you forever. Now, this point and number 6 go hand in hand. But this is a bad assumption. This is a very bad assumption. They may agree to only have sex with you forever. But something like 80% of all people, regardless of male or female, say that if they ever had the opportunity to cheat and they could be absolutely certain without a doubt that they wouldn't get caught, that they would do it. Which also means we somewhat understand at bottom that that doesn't say anything about how we feel about the other person. This doesn't mean you don't love them. It just means that sex is just sex. Has hookup culture taught us? Nothing. People will just meet up and bone after like 5 minutes on Tinder. So clearly we don't need to be so concerned with this and so jealous as to think that this is never, ever, ever going to happen. The dishonesty could be a big problem. That's the real problem you care about. And I encourage you to check out my other videos to find out why I ended up choosing non-monogamy as my choice to find a path out of this. But there's ways to deal with this desire in a healthy way. And the answer is not to pretend that it won't happen. It's the number one reason why couples fail. Because number six is the worse assumption, which is that you will only want to have sex with your partner forever. And let's check out what my buddy is saying here in the chat. I agree. The betrayal of cheating instead of the sex itself is what hurts people. And that's exactly right. Because if you're honest with yourself, you know that under the right circumstances, you're going to want to have sex with somebody else. Like, there's either if you were in this perfect moment, a weird weekend in Hollywood, and you had the opportunity to have sex with a celebrity that you knew was never going to turn into a long-term relationship, but like would be bragging rights forever, everyone wants to do that, okay? Like, that's dope. Also, there's just these going to be situations where maybe it's been a bad couple months with your primary partner. You still love them, you still care about them, but things have been rough. And maybe the sex hasn't been very good. Maybe overall you're stressed out and you find yourself in that vulnerable moment. Does that mean anything about like the last 5 years of your relationship that all of a sudden, you would just throw that away for what? For one night of fun? No, you just want to feel good just like every other normal human. We have to stop demonizing this desire. Now, again, if you cross that boundary dishonestly and don't talk about it and don't have that discussion, it's a big problem. The thing is if you're having that desire to sleep with somebody else, you need to talk to your partner about it and see what that means for both of you, because it's going to reveal an underlying insecurity or an underlying need that's not being met. And you should fix that. These two assumptions together, that you will only ever want to have sex with your partner and they will only ever want to have sex with you, are the number one reason why relationships fail. And I really mean that. It's because people don't talk about it. People are afraid to admit that they are attracted to, want to sleep with someone else, because they don't want to deal with what that might mean about their psyche. And I've been in that situation. Again, I talked about it in previous videos. So that's another big one that causes problems for people. Moving on, the next big assumption, and this goes with the last two, it goes with everything. It's the idea that people assume that you're responsible for each other's happiness. So this comes back to what Esther Perel says. She's one of my favorite relationship gurus out there in the world. We tend to expect that one person can give us and meet all of our needs that an entire village used to provide for somebody else. If one of you became physically injured or disabled, you're no longer going to be able to provide sexual happiness to your partner, and it will be no fault of your own. Does that mean they shouldn't be happy? Would you want them to not be happy? If all of a sudden one of the two of you lost all of your career over something simple, a dumb mistake, whatever, you're going to be completely miserable. Was the other person responsible for any of those actions that happened? No. In fact, you might not even be responsible for it happening. It could be somebody who was out to get you, or just capitalism in general. I'm sure you guys know my thoughts on that. You can't hold yourself responsible for somebody else's happiness, but we do make that assumption. And what happens is there's a two-way street with this. We assume that we're the reason someone else is happy. We also assume that we're the reason, or that they need to make us happy. Both of those are incredibly toxic. They're totally unjustified. They're terrible thoughts. No one should be in that boat. You will destroy each other. You will destroy each other. You have to take ownership of your own happiness and understand that our brains are weird and wired differently. I have struggled at times with depression. Micah has struggled at times with depression. A lot of people have. It's not either of our faults that sometimes all of a sudden just a wave of sadness will hit you, sometimes for weeks at a time. That doesn't mean that either of you did anything wrong. Nobody did anything wrong. It's just brain chemistry. Brain chemistry. So throw this one in the garbage bin too. All right, what's next? That you are obligated to share each other's interests. No, don't assume that. No one is obligated to do anything. This goes back to the possessive behavior, like I talked about with the your time assumption. It's kind of the other bitter thing to it, right? Does it mean that we shouldn't ever try to make personal sacrifices or try things to discover if maybe we're into it? Absolutely we should. But, if 5 episodes into Star Trek, she really hates Star Trek, fellas, give up on the Star Trek. It's okay. You can watch it by yourself in your personal time. If 5 episodes into Makeup and Murder History with Bailey Sarian, you realize that ain't for you, ladies, let your man bow out of that one. It's not that interesting, and it's not critical that he watches it with you. You can find other things to do together and find other things. You're allowed to have your own interests, and so are they. Just straight up, this is a common, really, really bad assumption that people make, that you have to have some kind of sharing of interests, and it really creates problems, because the truth is you can have full, deep, and meaningful relationships. Now, if you shared no interests together, sure, that might cause problems, but if you try hard enough and you work at it, oh, I know, Alex, work at relationships, yeah, sometimes they take effort. If you try hard enough, you will find things that you are both interested in, or if you're willing to try a lot of different things together, you might find new things that you actually are both interested in together. And that's what I would recommend for any couple. Now, time for average people talking to get controversial, y'all. Here's the real tough one. All of us assume, and I mean almost all of us, assume that we need to be the sole provider of our partner's sexual satisfaction. I know that there are some people who are actually bothered by their partner masturbating when they are not around or not available. So we're not even talking about cheating or getting it from somebody else. Let's say you've even made an agreement that neither of you will watch pornographic materials because you've taken your exclusivity to that extreme. Once again, watch my other videos because that's very silly and you shouldn't do that to your partner. But even if you're doing all of that, why can't your partner pleasure themselves once in a while? You don't need to be the sole provider of that. What is this ego trip that we have? So many people convince themselves that this is, I don't know, is this how y'all get meaning? Is this how y'all, get your confidence? I'm being a little mean here, but honestly, this is one of those assumptions that's really toxic to your relationship. I think what it is, in a lot of cases, is people are afraid to explore what it means when they know that they're not. But the truth is you're not. No matter how much you try to be, you're not. There are probably times, especially if you've been together long enough, that your partner has been satisfied through a lot of other causes that were not just you in the bedroom, and that satisfaction came from outside things in their mind that they're not going to admit to you because you have demonstrated that you have a fragile ego and need to be the sole provider of their sexual satisfaction. So they're not going to admit it to you, but you're lying to yourself is what the problem is here. You're lying to yourself if you think that that's always got to be you and always going to be you. There are a million situations where you're not, and there's probably a whole bunch of things that lead to your partner's sexual satisfaction that didn't start with you. So, let go of this one. Let go of this one. It will do you a lot of favors, especially because it ties into my last point. This is the biggest one for me. And I've talked about this in other videos, but I'm talking about it again tonight on this shorter episode of the show because this particular one is really the underlying philosophical problem that most people have about relationships. We have convinced ourselves that romantic relationships are special and magical. They're special because they're somehow different than any other relationship we manage. They're magical because of all the romantic literature that has existed now for the last few hundred years that just reinforces this idea that there's some special passion, there's this special magical property to a romance that is the most important thing that could ever happen in our lives, more important than any kind of individual or spiritual or personal satisfaction or goals that you might have in your life. The whole game is to find romance and make it magical and meaningful. I hate to break it to you, folks. That word romantic and reality doesn't mean Dickie McGee's axe. It just means having love, which I have in all of my friendships, I have in all of my family relationships, I have in all of my, in some capacity, even some of my work relationships. There's times we show love to each other in kind of more of a brotherly sense, but it's a form of love, right? What I think it is we think that frequent sexual and intimate relations adds magic there. Adds something special. But yet I'm sure you can think of examples of people that you have known, and even maybe yourself at times, where you've had, this is especially for people that have been in a long-term relationship that's failed, you get to a point where frequent sexual or intimate relations turns out to not mean anything at all. In fact, you continue to do it and you're not really sure why, even after things turn sour. Or maybe it goes in the other case, where things turn sour, so you stop doing that. And then you convince yourself, oh, we're not having any romance in our relationship, and that means something. It's not the reason your relationship is bad is not because it's lacking romance. It's lacking romance because you have a problem in your relationship. Romance is the evidence that we have a healthy relationship that's going well. As we get closer to our friends, the old When Harry Met Sally problem is that women and men can't be friends and can't be close friends without sex getting in the way. That's because we love to show physical affection to the people that we love the most. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any special. It's just the evidence of how we feel about them. That's what we want to do with the people that we're closest to. Now, obviously, for certain types of relationships, we don't turn that into a sexual nature, right? But there's a reason why we hug and kiss our kids. There's a reason why we might hug people that we're the closest to, like friends, longer. And yet our culture has convinced us, because exclusivity means physical contact, that this is becoming less and less acceptable. We're not allowed to give that evidence and actually demonstrate how much we love and care for some of our relationships. Because if we have a romantic relationship that we've put that label on and we've made it exclusive, we cut it off because we think that one's special and magical, and we only get those privileges with that special and magical one. And we cut that off from everybody else. And that's the ultimate thing that led to me becoming ethically non-monogamous, was realizing that that's all bullshit. And you don't have to follow any of that. That's all nonsense. None of it is justified. There's no special property or quality that makes a relationship romantic. The people you feel closest to, you're going to want to spend the most time and do the most intimate type of behaviors with. That's it. That's the only correlation. Relationships are just relationships. There are plenty of people you might want to have sexual and intimate relationships with that you don't want to have a very close or intense relationship. There's nothing wrong with that. And in an ethically non-monogamous, non-hierarchical relationship, like relationship anarchy, like what I want to practice in my life, that can happen like that. And that's what allows you to hit your sweet spot, like I've talked about before, with every single person that you're in a relationship with, is having that flexibility, having that openness. If you can throw out this one assumption, if you really think about it, it makes sense and it clarifies all of the other ones. It's kind of like the assumption underneath of it all. If you assume that a romantic relationship is special and different and magical, you assume that a romantic relationship means the same thing to your partner. And if it means the same thing to both of you, then ultimately we'll want the same thing. But what happens when you have a different definition of what makes a relationship romantic? What happens when you have a different idea of what makes it exclusive? It's because we think romances are special. We think our boundaries will be the same, or that we'll understand each other's boundaries, because we think romantic relationships are special. We think that our time belongs to each other because romantic relationships are special. We think that we're only going to want to be exclusive with each other and only have sex with each other because romantic relationships are special. We think that we're the only two people that can make each other happy, and we are the reason each other is happy because romantic relationships are special. Oh, we have to share each other's interests because that's why we fell in love. We had these shared interests, and that's what makes our romance so special. You've heard people talk this way, and I know I'm beating it up, but think about it. I alone can satisfy my partner, or should be the only one satisfying my partner, because romantic relationships are special and magical. If you can get rid of this one, you have taken the first major step towards having a much healthier, much more satisfying, much more deep and meaningful relationship. And it's the toughest one for people to get rid of, but it is a very, very, very bad assumption. I would love for somebody who really doubts me on some of these things to take this in context, watch some of my other videos on relationships, and if you ever want to come debate with me on any of these things, or tell me you think I'm full of shit and give me some counter arguments, some objections, and bring that stuff up to me, I'm all ears. In the meantime, please let people know about the stream. We are always live every Sunday at 7 p.m. Central on YouTube, Facebook Live, and also on Twitch. Would love any help with subscribers, followers, sharing your stuff on Facebook. Anything like that helps me out big time. Thank you all for coming tonight. I hope this quick hit was a good summary of what the problematic assumptions are on relationships that I've talked about before. Also, apologize for my nasally voice. I'm fighting a cold, so that didn't exactly help me tonight. But thank you all for coming, and I'll catch you next time.